Hello! This video is the third in a series that examines terms and concepts from the real estate world, using examples from architectural theory and history. We've started with the phrase open concept, a phrase found in numerous interior magazines, shows, and listing descriptions. In this video, we'll be looking at open plans as a type of open concept. The term open plan in architecture was reserved for describing the work of Mies van der Rohe and a few others, and the strategy for delineating space in projects like the Barcelona Pavilion and the Farnsworth House. And in this video, we'll look at what makes open plans unique from other types of open concepts. Stay tuned. Mies, hey man, what are you doing here? Are you smoking a cigar in here? I don't even think that's allowed. What are you looking at, man? It's kind of creepy the way you're looking into the house. You know, you didn't put any walls in there, and you're just kind of like leering in. Well, yeah. So either way, it's cool to see you here. You know, I thought you were dead, but congrats on all the great work, and I'll see you around. Open plans may sound similar to open concept, but when used in an architectural context, it means something very specific and is associated with how the architect Mies van der Rohe and a few select early 20th century architects explored the dissolution of rooms and eventually the visual dissolution of building boundaries. In our previous videos, we looked at organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright as a specific case of open concept. His was a diagonal overlap of rooms to create a building design from the inside out, as a singular cohesive entity with organs all working together like an organism. With the free plans of Le Corbusier, a simple shape is subdivided by a grid of columns, walls divide up space, and are threaded through with a specific path to experience these elements in a scripted sequence that was called an architectural promenade. These two, organic and free plans, not only create specific interior experiences, they also extend to generate a unique experience on the exterior. Organic plans connect to the outside through corner windows, which project inhabitants out into the surroundings, whereas free plans frame the outside with views that present it like a painting hanging on a wall. So let's trace the work of Mies van der Rohe to record how free plans evolved. Describing it as an evolution will allow us to look at its various aspects in isolation as they develop within his work over time. Mies van der Rohe was born in Germany and worked there until moving to Chicago in 1938. It's with designs for two unbuilt houses in his home country where we can see the first leap toward an open plan. The two houses we'll compare are the Lessing House and the Brick House, both of which Mies was working on at the same time, even though they exhibit fundamentally different approaches to space. The Lessing House plan is a complex of rectangles, broken into a few primary shapes that are combined together. Each primary shape is subdivided into a series of neatly adjacent rectangular rooms. Some rooms are more private and removed, some are actually courtyards or outdoor spaces contained within the primary envelope of the house. While anyone looking at this house would still call it modern, it does not yet exhibit the qualities of an open plan. Then there's the Brick House, and it's here where Mies is really able to propose a new level of continuity between the interior and the exterior space. He achieves this by focusing on the wall as a primary architectural element and liberating it to do things beyond just the job of creating enclosure. In the Brick House, the walls are independent entities that seem to explode into a composition of spaced out, right-angled lines. The walls stop and start at will, and seem like they only just happen to coalesce into a house. The line between inside and outside is hardly registered by the walls alone, and some walls extend so far out into the landscape they almost seem like they could go on forever. Mies found a way to dissolve the legibility of the building by challenging its outer boundary. Walls don't just trace the boundary of the building or rooms anymore. They're placed almost randomly relatively to the boundary of the house, and in some cases even run perpendicular to it, pointing outward into the landscape beyond. The concept of space is presented as an even field, where the architect manipulates portions of this field in a gradient fashion, almost like gravity influences certain zones in the universe. A couple of years later, Mies is able to realize his design for the Barcelona Pavilion, a building constructed as part of the World Exposition in 1929 and was meant to present Germany to the world as a thoroughly modern and pacifist country after their role in World War I. In this structure, walls are again deployed in such a way so as to express their independence and liberation as elements that can do things other than merely enclose space. While there is a guiding grid on the ground as a reference pattern for organization and composition, the walls are intentionally misaligned with the grid. And Mies sets up the rules and the expectations for a rigid organization, and then he completely disregards disregards them. This enhances the perception that these elements are under the influence of some guiding force that operates at a level independent from this initial framework. The walls of the Barcelona pavilion are still made of block or brick, but in this case they're framed with veneers of marble. This pattern and colorful lining wraps the wall like a present, and further defines it as a singular element or object without the visible markers that subdivide it into discrete parts like bricks. The wall is the important and expressed thing, and we as visitors don't perceive the parts that are gathered together to make it up. We as occupants are also left to interpret whether the wall is recruited to help hold up the roof. That's because the building also includes a small regular grid of structural columns. The grid is almost treated like a discrete object unto itself. It's not an endless field. Instead, it stops and starts well before it encounters any natural edges of the building. The grid is relegated to just a small area within the explosion of the walls. The columns are impossibly thin, chrome-clad crosses. The shape of the column marks a singular point in space, and the chrome-reflective material challenges observers to perceive their true size. Further, the column's thinness reveals that they can't be trusted to do all the work of holding up the roof. So, structurally, the walls and the columns must be working together, even if compositionally it looks like they're placed in a haphazard relationship. Nowhere is this more poignant than at the entrance of the interior of the pavilion, where two columns are placed perfectly aligned against a background wall. The columns are presented almost like a still life artwork to be viewed, complete with a backdrop. While elements appear to be slipping past one another in space, the elements sometimes snap perfectly into a precise composition. The Barcelona pavilion is primarily a steel structure. When we were examining the free plan of Le Corbusier, the construction material was concrete. A concrete column has mass, and the shape of the columns in the Villa Savoie are round. While thin compared to stone construction, they still have girth. But the Miesian column is just a cross at a point. The column has flat surfaces, which define edges of space, rather than Le Corbusier's, which were more sculptural and take up space. Corbusier's are convex, versus Mies's are concave. The Miesian wall in the Barcelona pavilion is different from Le Corbusier's wall too. Corbs are almost immaterial, just white stucco planes that bend, or may contain rectangular opening frames punched into them. The Miesian wall has a materiality and pattern with its marble or its travertine veneer. They're not bending around here, nor do they have any openings punched in them. Each is a fragment of pure, unadulterated wallness. Movement on the Barcelona pavilion isn't particularly scripted either. The visitor is free to roam and explore. Mies is able to call attention to particular moments in the design through the arrangement of elements, not with a prescribed path of view angles. The building is like a spatial field of elements arranged freely that interact with precision and express the flowing nature of space as a stage for holding and relating objects. The shape of the building seems to dissolve at its edges, creating ambiguous delineations between inside and outside. Finally, we can take a look at Mies's Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois, where the open plan finds yet another level of expression. The house is a glass box hanging from the standard I-beam columns located on the outside of the building. This configuration is called an umbrella diagram, where the roof is held up from outside support and the interior is free from structure altogether. Again, we have an unmolested, regular grid of columns in the Farnsworth house. However, whereas the crosses are the same in two directions, I-beams have a singular orientation, which gives a grain and a direction to the underlying grid. The rectangle that includes the house has an enclosed zone and an open one. There's an ambiguous reading to the collection. One way to read it is as two parallel linear arrangements, and the other is as an even field that could be imagined to continue in any direction. Here, the wall loses its primacy, as the building is a few horizontal planes with some furniture and a built-in wooden object that holds functional elements like the kitchen and the bathrooms. The wooden object doesn't go all the way to the ceiling, so as to reinforce the idea that it's an object set within the field that are defined by the columns and the horizontal planes. The wooden object is located so as to provide spatial differentiation where necessary. There's a minimum amount of elements to provide the maximum amount of spatial articulation. Despite the lack of walls, it is still possible to point out the dining room, the kitchen, the bedroom, and the living room. Sheets of glass that span clear between the floor slab and the ceiling provide the limited enclosure of the house. These are lined with a track of curtains which open and close depending on the inhabitants' desire for privacy or for shading. There are multiple consequences of the window wall when we compare it to either the corner window of Wright or the ribbon window of Corbusier. Window walls transform the perception of the building and appear different whether it is nighttime or daytime. During the day, one has an unbroken view of the surrounding landscape. It's not a complete immersion in nature though, and Mies described the effect as a separation and a distancing from nature that allows you to see it or contemplate it anew. During the night, the dark exterior increases the effect of the reflections, and it heightens the sense that there's a surface surrounding you. This increases the perception of enclosure, and the mirrored reflections visually extend the interior into an infinite expanse. This makes literal the conception that space extends infinitely between the two planes of the floor and the ceiling. With open plans, we finally start to have a freely floating, fully articulated slab. Columns help to delineate and define space. Movement is freed from paths. Walls are either treated as objects or disappear altogether, and thus windows are no longer punches in facades, rather they are full sheets of glass spanning from floor to ceiling. So that's how open plans are unique in the triad of open concept plan types. I hope you found this video enlightening and entertaining, and I hope to see you next time. Thanks.